Hello, welcome back to Lecture 3 on Preference Assessment. Today we're going to talk about the free operant approach, a response restriction approach, an alternative method for preference assessment, and then we're going to touch briefly on reinforcer assessments. So let's begin. The first thing is when we talk about approaches to preference assessment, there are generally 5 different types: the single stimulus, the paired stimulus, the multiple stimulus, the free operant, and response restriction, which is a term you're probably just hearing about now for the first time. In the free operant method, Ronan, Vollmer, Ringdahl, and Marcus in 1998 published a study where they looked at stimulus preference assessments using a free operant approach. Participants had non-contingent access to an array of stimuli, could interact with any of the stimuli during a 5-minute session. Object manipulation was recorded using a 10-second partial interval recording procedure. And what they found were some of the advantages was that it was very time efficient, it reduced behavior problems because there were a lot of fun things to do in the environment and no demands being placed on them, so it was just like going to Disney World for a little while. Some of the disadvantages were false negatives and did not produce rank order. I guess the case with the false negatives was that kids would play with things that wouldn't necessarily serve as a reinforcer. That is, they wouldn't be willing to work for those particular items. The other is not producing a rank order. That's simply a function of the type of recording procedure that they chose to use in this particular study. If they'd used a duration measure, they certainly could have looked at comparing the relative duration of how long the child was in contact with one item versus another, and then just ranked them according to the amount of time they spent with one toy versus another piece of food or whatever it is that you've got in the environment for the kid. So response restriction, what is that? Well, response restriction was first talked about by Hanley, Iwata, Lindberg, and Connors in 2003. During stimulus preference assessment, 7 activities were presented similar to a free operant model. Object manipulation was recording using a 5-second partial interval recording procedure. During the 5-minute session, no prompts or consequences were given. 16 to 21 sessions were run to assess participant preference for 7 items. That's a lot of sessions. When you're talking about 21 different sessions to look at preference for 7 items. So that's going to take a lot of time. In the response restriction procedure, an item was removed between sessions. So from session 1 to session 2, they removed a certain item if the item was selected for 60% or more of the intervals during the across 2 consecutive sessions. So if session 1 and 2, they played with a ball for 60% of the time or more across those 2 sessions, the ball's not there in session 3. The item was selected for 60% or more in 2 out of 3 sessions, and responding was not allocated to an alternative activity for 60% or more during the same session. So basically, if you're choosing one particular item, we're going to give you, you can do it for a couple of sessions, and then we're going to take it out and not make that a choice in the next session so that we see what else out of those 7 items. So if there's one particular item that you really like to play with, you get to play with it the first 2 sessions, but not the third, and then you're only going to have 6 opportunities or 6 items that you can choose from. And then if you do it again, you focus in on one, then you may only have 5 items. So this is a way of sort of rank ordering the particular items. I think there's a lot easier way, but this was the way they chose to do it. If responding was variable, sessions continued until responding was consistently allocated to a small group of activities, 2 or more. Responding was more consistently allocated to one of the remaining activities. Experiments continued to remove activities until little or no interaction occurred with at least 2 consecutive sessions. So they really wanted to get down to the point to where there was just nothing there left out of the 7 that the kids particularly cared to play with. Comparison to the free operant model is all participants interacted with each activity during the response restriction procedure, but not within the free operant, and response restriction was able to produce a rank order of preference. A lot easier way to do that, take a duration measure during the free operant. The disadvantage is the length of the assessment. Took about 80 minutes. Complicated nature of the restriction procedure. What do you keep in? What do you keep out? You got to be doing data in between sessions. This is a very difficult thing to do. Takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to be able to run it. An alternative preference assessment, which is practical and time efficient, limited false negatives, produces a hierarchy and not associated with increase in problem behavior, is what they're calling an alternative preference assessment. Basically, in experiment 1, 8 students attending a residential and day program, 5 male, 3 female. They all had what's called acquired brain injury. That means they've suffered a head trauma, like in an automobile or motorcycle accident, something like that, as opposed to a brain injury that was something they were born with. The average, or the age, ranged between 7 and 20 years of age. The average was 14 years. They had very limited verbal communication, so right off the bat, this eliminates the ability to be able to do some sort of a survey or a questionnaire with these individuals, because they really didn't have good verbal skills. And they'd been identified by staff as students for whom potent reinforcers were difficult to identify. Of course, everybody says that about every one of their students, or they complain that reinforcers change from day to day or minute to minute. Basically, what we had here was 5 items identified by classroom or residential staff to be preferred. Students observed to engage in the activity without prompting during free time. So there's sort of a free operant approach that's gone on before, but the identification of these items is not necessarily based on objective data. It's just based on sort of retrospective memory of the staff as to which one of the items the students like. Novel items with properties similar to the items the students observed to engage in without prompting. So if they liked red balls, maybe they put a green ball and a blue ball in there. If they liked things that you could spin and make noise with, if they liked things that were like puppets or little sort of hand toys, then they would get a variety of those. If they had one that they liked, then they would get several input in. They did a free operant procedure. They were placed on a table within reach. Session began when the therapist had demonstrated that each item and was making no physical contact with the items. Duration of object manipulation was recorded from the time the participant made physical contact with an item. There we go. They're using a duration measure. And session was terminated after 10 minutes. Then they did a limited free operant. Same as free operant with the following exceptions. After 2 minutes of consecutive object manipulation, that item was taken away. So if you play with a red ball for 2 minutes, I'm going to take the red ball away. Session was terminated after 10 minutes or 2 consecutive minutes with no object manipulation. So we get down to the point that there's nothing there I really want to play with. We'll go for a couple minutes. If you don't play with anything, then we'll stop the session. The dependent measure was maximum duration, the longest consecutive amount of time. The ceiling of 2 minutes for alternative assessment and 10 minutes for the free operant. Frequency of problem behavior, any instance of participant engaging in aggression, any maladaptive behavior, and duration of problem behavior. So we're going to look at frequency and duration of challenging behavior. So that was a procedure that they seemed to think was an alternative to the free operant procedure. But then again, I keep saying the same thing over and over again. I know it. Just do a free operant procedure and take a duration measure. You might also want to record the frequency and duration of the problem behaviors while you're doing that, because I think that would have a good correlation with preferences and how they affect behavior. So the last thing we need to talk about are reinforcer assessments. And again, this is not something you're probably going to do very often, but it's a good thing to know what they are and what it's about. The evaluation of a small number of stimuli, highly preferred to determine the reinforcing effects of the stimuli. They're presented contingently upon a desired behavior in what's called a multi-element design. You should remember that from your research methods class. You should also remember it from the Iwata 1982 study and some others in the FBA studies, where you alternate between it's sort of like a rapid reversal design, where it's an A, B, A, B, A, B, or A, B, C, A, B, C kind of a design, but you change conditions after every session. And the reason you do that is you're going to have one reinforcer. You're going to take a single behavior and you're going to reinforce clap your hands. But you're going to reinforce it in one 5-minute session with a piece of chocolate. You're going to reinforce it in the next session with a drink of juice. You're going to reinforce it in the next session with a pat on the back. You're going to reinforce it in the next session with access to a toy. So you've got 4 different conditions that you're going to alternate, and you're going to do it in a random order, and you're going to look to see, and you're going to graph each one of them separately, just like we did in the Iwata study, in the Iwata 82 study, and you're going to look to see if one or more of those reinforcers actually changes behavior at a higher rate than the others. Reinforcer sampling was first talked about by Ione and Azrin in 1968 in their article, A Psychiatric Nurse as a Behavioral Engineer, where they described a procedure called reinforcer sampling, designed to increase the frequency of using potential reinforcers. Involve force engagement for brief periods of time, increased number and duration of the use of potential reinforcers available. So even back as far as 1968, Ione and Azrin talked about needing to identify whether a stimulus that is being used contingent upon a behavior is actually a reinforcer, or is it just a reward? More on reinforcer sampling and assessment. Smith et al. 1995 compared reinforcer sampling to teacher choice at the start of the training session and found little or no difference in stimuli were selected by subjects rather than experimenters. This really contradicts some of the earlier studies where they say that what the teacher or the parent picks out has little or nothing to do with what will actually work as a reinforcer. Go read the study. It might be worth looking at to see why they got different results. So that's the end of lecture 3. It's the end of the 3 lectures on preference assessment. I've said this several times, but I'm going to say it one last time. Preference assessment is an integral part of what we do. If you write a behavior plan, if you write a teaching lesson and a protocol to teach a child something, and you're not sure that the stimulus that you're using contingent upon that behavior is not a reinforcer, and you don't get good change in that child's behavior, more than likely it's because you never did a preference assessment and you don't know what the reinforcers really are for that particular child. Some of the other issues that come up from time to time that didn't get talked a lot about in this particular lecture was the need to reevaluate preferences from time to time. Also the need to give children alternatives. One of the things I've always liked is having a reinforcer menu that's available for the child, so that after they engage in a behavior, you can show them a little card, or it's up on the wall, and basically can say, okay, pick from the menu, and you can pick whatever you want. So there's different things up there that they can pick, and they can identify what they want. A really nice way of sort of not having someone satiate on a particular reinforcer after several trials in a discrete trial session. So anyway, remember how to do preference assessments. Pick one of the ones that you like. Use different ones at different times, but just if you don't take anything else away from this particular section in the course, you really need to do preference assessments. Thanks a lot, and I will be seeing you in another week on a lecture on social validity, and then the final lecture on treatment integrity, and then we're going to be done with the course. So have a nice weekend.